I absolutely love milk inside a bag of milk, and I'm not Canadian. Was that funny? Milk Inside a Bag of Milk is a metavisual novel released in the latter half of the pandemic. If you haven't played the game yet or are not sure what I mean by metavisual novel, think of Doki Doki Literature Club, a game that breaks the fourth wall with characters aware they're in a video game. Milk is a visual novel about going to the store and buying a bag of milk. As straightforward as its description can be, the richness of the game lies within its narrative. At first, our protagonist, who the community refers to as Milk-chan, appears to be a socially awkward girl. Just like at the first line of dialogue within the visual novel. I'm on my way to the store, rehearsing the speech. This line gives off the impression that Milk-chan might be some kind of socially anxious girl, and mentions it's been quite some time since she's been outside. However, it's this line that draws my attention. I haven't been out for so long that I've forgotten the words they say when they enter the store. By keeping the thought of Milk-chan as a socially awkward girl, this line might appear as just part of her persona. However, the choice of switching from the first-person pronoun I in the first half and the sentence to the third-person pronoun they in the latter half suggests that Milk-chan is going through a sense of disassociation by consciously creating a distinction between her and other people who normally take trips to the store. I've just noticed that this version of the line is only present within the original English translation and not the improved, localized version, so take what I said with a grain of salt. Another thing I find quite curious about the game is its narrative element. Within Milk, you play as the player, the second voice of Milk-chan, an involved spectator who acts as a sense of reason, action, and judgment. Milk-chan is a self-reflexive character who pokes fun at the fact that she's in a video game, although still expressing hints of willful ignorance as she imagines she's in a video game, rather than outright acknowledging it. The protagonist of Milk attempts to create a sense of detachment from the real world by rendering herself as a video game character meant to carry out the task of getting milk. This is where the meta-narrative devices come into play. However, if we choose to move away from viewing her language as a meta-narrative device, you can also portray her decision to view herself as a video game character as a manifestation of a sort of mental illness, which is a point that becomes more relevant later in the game. Later, the player is presented with a singular option of choosing the piece of dialogue that reveals to Milk-chan that she's been walking with one foot on the asphalt and the other on grass. Although it's not something necessarily serious, Milk-chan appears to be in great distress from this fact. While I've tied some of her previous behaviors to social anxiety, I believe this part might align a bit more with OCD. However, I'm not super well versed in this, and nor am I qualified to make these kinds of statements, so these are solely interpretations of the game. Milk-chan's distress over her unordinary walking patterns seem to align more with OCD, as she immediately becomes hyper-focused on her walking habits. It's also within the sequence that Milk-chan shifts back onto the meta-narrative elements of the game. Midway through this sequence, Milk-chan creates a break within the lines. Could you at least paraphrase it a little? You can't just repeat a phrase without changing at least one word. People don't talk like that. Here, Milk-chan is referring to the previous lines chosen from the player. Step 1. Take a step back to get your foot exactly in your own footprint. And okay. Step 50. Take a step back to get your foot exactly in your footprint. This break is a reflection of the novelty that is needed within video games and all of media itself. The line explores the satisfaction of engagement within media and its need to feel fresh to avoid mundanity, which the act of playing video games might attempt to subvert. When arriving at the supermarket, we are greeted by this weird-looking thing, an alien-like figure which appears to me as two inhuman faces stemming from a trunk. This figure continuously repeats "oh," and any response simply prompts its return. The alien motif is repeated a second and final time as Milk-chan arrives at the checkout to buy the bag of milk. The tone of the cashier comes off as harsh, with the letters being fully capitalized and lying on the brink of comprehension, as every response is depleted to its most simple form. Know and give more. Though not entirely incomprehensible, the cashier is unable to speak in sentences and resorts to only quick expressions. One interpretation of this dialogue could be some sort of psychosis, which causes these words to be foreign, strange, and incomplete. In the case of O, the only way forward is repeating O. While the word appears to have no meaning within language, it does appear to have some sort of substance whenever it comes to communication and emotional responses. In this case, O is revealed to be some kind of black hole, or rather a void of non-existence, meant to convey the weight of existential dread. However, this understanding comes quite easily, as Milkshan directly states. He's trying to scare me, but how does he know that I'm terrified of the letter O? And when you follow up and ask, what makes it so scary, she responds, I have a frightening image when I picture it in my head. So, while O and its correlation to existential dread is explicitly stated, I think it runs a bit more deeper within its context of the conversation. And just like I said, the word O means nothing within the context of a normal conversation, and though the game gives us its own explicit interpretation, a later understanding of Milkshan and her perspective of the world creates instead a loss or transfiguration of meaning. What I mean to say is, perhaps O refers to something ordinary that may act as a normal point in conversation. However, the statement that O carries also brings along some kind of emotional baggage, like asking someone who pursued a degree in philosophy, so what's happened in your life since you graduated? Despite the detrimental nature of the statement, it still is an average one and appears as O, a symbol of some kind of vast emotional baggage. As for the reason of people in this game appearing as something otherworldly, I see it as a device that further expresses Milkshan's disconnection of her widely accepted reality. Maybe this disconnect is the reason why Milkshan is able to break the fourth wall and surpass her role as a visual novel character. After leaving the store, the scene turns to a gas station, or rather, the path towards a gas station. And it is here that we learn a little bit more about Milkshan's personal life. A bag of milk unpleasantly tugs at my hand, reminded me of the days I was in physical therapy. Also, here's another quote that caught my attention. By the way, they gave me a bag at the checkout, so now I'm carrying a bag of milk in another bag. Don't think anything of it, I just love the pyramidal structure of verbal constructions. When this was said, I immediately thought it shared some resemblance to Hegelian dialectics, and as I tried to find out what this might be referring to, I came across the Minto pyramid principle. However, not only am I not well versed in these subjects, I was not even aware of the latter. So if anyone in the comments wants to take a shot at it, please. Also, I have no clue what the ice cream bar thing means. Also, take a shot. As we continue to walk, we come to encounter what Milkshan recognizes to be a bear, with red eyes, and we quickly clarify that it was a truck. This recognition follows suit of the strange otherworldliness that Milkshan appears to have, which we've seen previously at the store. Then she says, although when you think about it, are there bears with eyes on the back of their heads? The only response here is, you could have died. Come on, are you saying someone would seriously want to kill an innocent girl carrying a bag of milk? And I responded with, the world is a cruel and dangerous place. To where Milkshan responds with, I'm not in the world you are talking about. If we take the world we are referring to in this statement as our world, the world outside the game, then by all means Milkshan would be right. But if we choose this statement while interpreting its ownership to be the world in the visual novel, then it makes Milkshan's statement far more important to consider. We've already established that there's some kind of detachment between Milkshan and her normal world. So when she says, I'm not in the world you're talking about, she quite literally means that she is not experiencing the world in the way she is expected to. The next scene takes us to a traffic light where Milkshan begins to describe her experiences in a way that sounds similar to a psychotic episode. When I'm in a hurry, all the traffic lights turn off helpfully. When I feel like crying, a cloud appears from over me and pours rain streams that drown my tears. Then she tells us she is sad, and how she can feel a cloud gathering above her head, in which I respond with, are you sure this is really happening? Followed up with the response, has it occurred to you that it's all in your head? I think that it's at this point our role as an extension of Milkshan begins to break as she begins to find some sort of awareness to her delusions. As she responds, "That's not what the manual said at all. Apparently, these pills don't work for me either." From here, you can either decide to be quiet or push Milkshan to be her true self. Staying quiet results in continuing the game, while pushing her towards the truth ends with this picture that I've probably used within the thumbnail. Also, I'm not quite sure what these lines mean. I don't know what it is about them, but it trips me up. Right now, I see it as some kind of prescription manual or some kind of game manual, since she seems to be able to recognize that she exists within a visual novel. Just the follow-up of, "Has it occurred to you that it's all in your head?" being, "That's not what the manual said at all," seems strange. Or am I just looking too deeply at it and it's meant to be interpreted as a response to her delusions having real-world implications despite, in quotations, being all in her head? A saying that might dismiss the gravity of her distress. If you choose to keep quiet rather than asking her what the pills have to do with it, then the game continues and Milkshan begins to open up. First, by fully acknowledging that she is a character inside a visual novel, and how she wishes to directly interact with the player. Here comes in the self-parody of the genre as she brings up this image of a bench, most likely a bench inside a park, which can be seen as a cliche within visual novels and anime, and monologues about her mental decline, hopes for a peaceful life, her unusual characteristics as a protagonist, whatever this means, ending in her desire not to name her diagnosis, though concluding that after all, the player is just a figment of her imagination. Also, I'd like to say that I deeply respect the creator's decision not to name a specific diagnosis. I believe it's a great respect to your character not to confine them into one specific narrative. She asks what it's like to see the world from her perspective, how despite only seeing red and blood, she's become accustomed to it. Then she calls back to the monsters in the store, stating that she isn't scared of them. However, at times she fears that they may be afraid of her. And then she finally reveals to us what has happened, as she mentions her difficult relation to her family and tells us that the image on the screen is her father, that committed suicide by jumping out the window, and shuts down that line of conversation by stating that it had been her last memory leading up to a large gap. Now she goes on about how big of an accomplishment her trip to the store was and ultimately accredits you, the player, and speaks about a noticeable barrier within your communication, although rather than suggesting it is a bad thing, she admits that's just the way she likes it. I think it's important to take this point into consideration. I often find people online mimicking the point that the greatest tragedy is that no one will ever fully understand them because of barriers put up within communication. However, I don't see this barrier as a bad thing. I don't think anyone would ever truly want to be known completely, especially the embarrassing bits. And if you do, you're just mimicking the plot of Evangelion. Then she continues her monologue on how difficult her everyday life is, the difficulty with dealing with the loss of her father, and the plethora of medication she's taken. But in the end, she's happy as long as they keep her on her feet. It's a very touching and sad monologue that I find difficult putting into words. However, when I first played the game, I remember it as a sort of sad, tinged piece of cardboard soaked in water that occasionally continues dripping. However, the game abruptly releases the tension through the noise made by the choice pop-up, and we tell Milkshan it's probably time to head home. And we do. Arriving at home, we are greeted by Milkshan's mother. She has a noticeably more heavy tone, and she speaks. "Did you bring the milk?" She asks you twice and then asks you if the new medication has worked. Milk-chan responds with yes, and is told to go to bed. The game then ends with the image of Milk-chan's mother on the screen, as the music grows into a gradual, disturbing noise. It seems to me that the decision to change the pitch for Milk-chan's mother is to introduce her as a sense of authority. Her face also resembles a mask, which I can see as a product of Milk-chan's difficult relationship with her mother, causing Milk-chan to view her mother as a stranger, something foreign to her worldview. Maybe it's due to detachment, trauma, negative experiences with her mother, or her diagnosis. However, despite their difficult relationship, it appears that her mother does care for her in the way that a mother would, and simply wants the best for her. Anyways, this is probably the longest script I've written for a video. If you've enjoyed, please consider subscribing. It lets me know what kind of videos you guys like and enjoy the most, and it helps me to continue uploading. I've been wanting to make this video since November. I'm really glad I've finally done it. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.